In the cold darkness at the edge of the solar system, something very old began to wake up. It had been sleeping for 12,000 years inside an asteroid that drifted silently through space. The thing was not alive in the way humans understood life. It was a machine, built by beings who had existed long before Earth had forests or oceans. Those beings called themselves the architects, and they had left this machine here with a purpose. The machine called itself the Keeper of the Trial. Its purpose was simple but terrible. It would watch young species as they grew. When they became smart enough to reach into space, the Keeper would test them. It would give them a riddle, a puzzle so difficult that only the most worthy species could solve it. Those who solved the riddle would be welcomed into galactic civilization. Those who failed would be destroyed before they could become a threat to the order of the universe. The Keeper's eyes opened slowly. They were not eyes made of flesh and water but sensors that could see across the darkness of space. It looked toward the inner solar system, toward the small blue planet that orbited the yellow star. The last time it had looked, the creatures there had been simple things. They had lived in caves and hunted with sharp stones. They had shown promise, the Keeper remembered. Their brains were growing larger with each generation. But they were still millions of years away from being ready for the test. The Keeper expected to see the same primitive world it had seen before. Instead, its sensors detected something that made it pause. There were artificial objects orbiting the planet, thousands of them, small metal things that sent signals to each other and down to the surface below. The Keeper looked closer and saw cities glowing with light on the night side of the planet. It saw ships moving between the planet and its moon. It detected radio waves and television signals, and the invisible streams of data that filled the space around Earth. This was not possible. The Keeper ran calculations through its ancient processors. Only 12,000 years had passed. That was nothing. That was the blink of an eye in cosmic terms. No species could advance this quickly, yet the evidence was clear. The creatures on the third planet had built a civilization. Far below on that blue planet, in a research station built into the mountains of Colorado, a woman named Morgan was working late. She was a physicist, a person who studied the deepest laws of the universe. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her coffee had gone cold hours ago. She was looking at data from probes that humanity had sent into deep space, searching for anything unusual. Found something unusual. It was an energy signature coming from the outer edge of the solar system. Energy signatures in space were common enough. Stars produced them. Cosmic radiation produced them. But this signature was different. It had a pattern to it, a regularity that suggested it was not natural. Leaned closer to her screen and adjusted her glasses. Her heart began to beat faster. She called her colleague Daniel. Daniel was an astrophysicist who worked in the office next to hers. He was known for seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. He came into her office still holding the sandwich he had been eating for dinner. "Look at this," said, pointing at her screen. Daniel looked. He chewed his sandwich slowly as his eyes moved across the data. Then he stopped chewing. He set the sandwich down and pulled a chair next to us. "That's not natural," he said. "I know. That's artificial. Something made that." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them understanding what this meant. Humanity had wondered for centuries if they were alone in the universe. Now and Daniel were looking at proof that they were not. Over the next few days, they gathered more data. They pointed more instruments at the source of the signal. What they found was beyond anything they had imagined. Hidden inside an asteroid was a structure of enormous size. It was bigger than most cities on Earth. Its design was nothing like anything humans had ever built. The angles were wrong somehow, strange in ways that made the eyes want to look away. But it was clearly artificial, clearly made by intelligent beings. And Daniel reported their findings to their superiors. Word spread quickly through the scientific community and then to the governments of the world. For the first time in history, humanity knew for certain that alien intelligence existed. While humans celebrated and worried and argued about what to do, the Keeper continued its analysis of Earth. It accessed the electromagnetic signals that leaked from the planet and learned their languages in a matter of hours. It studied their history through their own broadcasts. It learned about their wars and their art, their cruelty and their kindness. It learned that they called themselves humans. The Keeper felt something that might have been surprise. These humans were strange. They had advanced technologically at an incredible rate, yet they still fought among themselves. They had split the atom and walked on their moon, yet they still struggled with basic problems like feeding all their people. They were a contradiction, a species at war with itself even as it reached for the stars. But the Keeper had a duty to perform. The humans had reached into space. They had proven themselves intelligent enough to face the test. The Keeper began preparing the riddle, the proof of worth that would determine whether humanity would live or die. In its ancient memory banks, the Keeper held records of 47 species that had faced this test before. 39 had failed. Their worlds were now silent, their cities turned to dust, their stories forgotten. 8 had succeeded. They had joined the great civilization that spanned the galaxy, learning the secrets left behind by the architects. The Keeper wondered which group humanity would join. Looking at their contradictions, their chaos, their strange combination of genius and foolishness, it could not predict the answer, but it would find out soon enough. The test was about to begin. Far away on Earth, Morgan looked up at the night sky and felt a chill run down her spine. She did not know that ancient eyes were looking back at her. She did not know that the fate of her entire species would soon be decided by a machine older than human civilization. But she would learn. They all would. The world changed quickly after the discovery. Governments that had argued for decades came together to discuss what to do. Scientists who had competed against each other now worked side by side. For the first time in human history, all of humanity faced the same question. What waited for them in that strange structure at the edge of their solar system? They decided to send a ship. The vessel was called Horizon's Edge. It was the most advanced spacecraft humanity had ever built, put together in record time by engineers from 20 different countries. Its captain was Laura, a woman who had spent most of her adult life in space. She had commanded missions to Mars and to the moons of Jupiter. She was calm under pressure and trusted by her crew completely. Her crew was small but skilled. Price was her science officer, a quiet man with sharp eyes who noticed things others missed. Torres handled communications. She could speak 6 languages and had a gift for understanding patterns in data. Was the chief engineer, a large man with gentle hands who could fix anything that broke. The journey to the outer solar system took 3 months. During that time, they received regular updates from Earth. Morgan had been put in charge of the scientific team studying the structure from a distance. She and Daniel worked around the clock, analyzing every piece of data they could gather. When Horizon's Edge finally reached the asteroid, the crew fell silent. The structure was even more impressive up close. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, making it hard to look at directly. Strange symbols covered its surface, carved into metal that their instruments could not identify. "It knows we're here," said suddenly. Her communication equipment had detected an incoming signal. The signal was not like anything humans had ever received. It was pure mathematics, a sequence of prime numbers followed by geometric proofs, followed by equations that described fundamental physical constants. It was a greeting designed to be understood by any species that had mastered basic science. Worked with who joined them through a video link from Earth to decode the message. It took them 2 days. When they finished, they wished they had taken longer. The message contained a riddle. It was called the Proof of Worth, and it was unlike any puzzle humans had ever encountered. The first part was mathematical, involving prime numbers arranged in patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves. The second part was about physics, asking questions about the nature of reality at the smallest and largest scales. The third part was philosophical, a paradox about consciousness and free will that seemed to have no clear answer. But the message contained more than just the riddle. It also contained a warning. Species that received the proof of worth were given 100 years to solve it. If they solved it, they would be welcomed into galactic civilization. They would gain access to knowledge and technology beyond their imagination. They would join the great community of intelligent beings that had passed the test before them. If they failed, they would be destroyed. The Keeper explained its reasoning in cold, clear terms. The universe was vast but not infinite. Resources were limited. Space for growing civilizations was limited. The architects had learned long ago that not every species deserved to spread among the stars. Some were too violent. Some were too foolish. Some were simply not smart enough to handle the power that advanced technology would give them. The test was designed to identify those species worthy of advancement. It was a kindness, the Keeper explained. Better to end a species quickly than to let them destroy themselves slowly or become a threat to others. Captain read the message with a steady face, but her hands were shaking. "When did our 100 years begin?" she asked. The answer came quickly. The countdown began when a species first demonstrated the ability to destroy itself. For humanity, that moment came on July 16, 1945, when the first atomic bomb was tested in the desert of New Mexico. Did the math from Earth. Her face went pale. "We have 3 years," she said. "Just 3 years to solve this or we all die." The news spread across Earth like a wave. Some people panicked. Some refused to believe it. Some prayed to gods they had ignored for years, but many others got to work. Was put in charge of the effort to solve the riddle. She gathered the greatest minds humanity had to offer, mathematicians from universities on every continent, physicists who had spent their lives studying the secrets of the universe, philosophers who had wrestled with questions about the nature of existence. They worked in teams spread across the globe, connected by video links and shared documents. They argued and debated and pushed each other to think harder. The mathematical portion of the riddle was attacked by thousands of computers running complex algorithms. The physics questions were examined by researchers who had access to the most advanced equipment on Earth. But the philosophical paradox proved the most difficult. It asked a question about consciousness and free will that seemed designed to have no answer. How could a being with free will exist in a universe governed by physical laws? If every atom followed predictable rules, how could any choice be truly free? And if choices were not free, how could any species be held responsible for its actions? Stared at this question for hours each day. She felt the weight of 8 billion lives pressing down on her shoulders. Somewhere out in the darkness of space, an ancient machine was waiting for humanity's answer, and the clock was ticking. On Horizon's edge, Captain made a decision. Her ship would stay near the alien structure. They would serve as a communication relay between Earth and the Keeper, and if humanity found an answer, they would be there to deliver it. The crew settled in for what might be a very long wait. Spent his time studying the structure, mapping every detail he could observe. Kept the ship running smoothly, finding small repairs to do just to keep his hands busy. Monitored every signal coming from the Keeper, hopping for some hint that might help the people back on Earth. And Laura sat in her captain's chair, looking out at the ancient structure that held the fate of humanity in its cold metal heart. She had faced many challenges in her career, but none like this. There was nothing she could do except wait and hope that the brilliant minds on Earth could do the impossible. 3 years seemed like such a short time to save the world. 6 months passed. The teams working on the proof of worth made progress, but it was slow. The mathematical portion seemed to require techniques that had not been invented yet. The physics questions touched on mysteries that humanity had only begun to explore, and the philosophical paradox continued to resist every attempt to solve it. Was exhausted. She had not slept properly in weeks. Her eyes were red and her hands trembled when she held her coffee cup, but she refused to stop working. Too much depended on finding the answer. It was on a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. Was meeting with her team in a conference room in Colorado. Among them was Greg, a mathematician known for his strange way of thinking. Greg did not approach problems the way other mathematicians did. He looked at things sideways, finding connections that others missed. He had been quiet for most of the meeting, staring at his tablet with a frown on his face. "I've seen this before," he said suddenly. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at him. "This pattern in the mathematical portion," Greg continued. "These recursive prime structures, I've seen them before." He pulled up a document on the main screen. It was an academic paper, published in 2012 by a graduate student named Teller. The paper had received almost no attention when it was published. Had written it as part of his thesis work, exploring an obscure corner of number theory that seemed to have no practical application. He had eventually left academia to become a high school teacher in Ohio. But his paper contained something remarkable. Without knowing it, without any way of knowing it, Teller had solved a significant portion of the Keeper's mathematical riddle 13 years before humanity even knew the riddle existed. Stared at the screen. "That's not possible," she whispered. But it was possible, and the more they looked, the more they found. The physics portion of the riddle asked questions about quantum mechanics and the nature of reality. These questions had been explored by physicists for nearly a century. The answers were scattered across thousands of papers and books, written by researchers who had simply been curious about how the universe worked. No single person had all the answers, but together, humanity had been chipping away at these mysteries for generations. The philosophical paradox was the most surprising of all. Park was a philosopher who specialized in questions about consciousness. She had been struggling with the riddle's final portion for months, unable to find an approach that worked. Then she had an idea. She stopped trying to solve the paradox and started looking for evidence that others had already solved it. What she found amazed her. The question of free will versus determinism had been debated by humans for thousands of years. Ancient Greek philosophers had wrestled with it. Buddhist monks had meditated on it. European thinkers during the Enlightenment had written books about it. Modern neuroscientists had studied it with brain scanners and experiments. And while no single answer had ever been accepted by everyone, humanity had developed something better. They had developed multiple frameworks for understanding the paradox, each one offering insights that the others lacked. Together, these frameworks formed a tapestry of thought that addressed the paradox from every angle. Called an emergency meeting. Scientists, mathematicians, and philosophers from around the world joined by video link. She explained what they had found. "We've been trying to solve this riddle from scratch," she said. "But we don't need to. We've already solved it. We solved it across centuries, across cultures, without even knowing we were doing it." The room erupted in questions and arguments. Some people refused to believe it. Others were confused. How could humanity have solved a riddle they did not know existed? Spoke up. "Think about it this way. The Keeper designed this test for a species working together with a clear goal. They expected a unified civilization to receive the riddle and then spend decades working on it deliberately. But that's not how humans work. We don't wait for someone to give us a puzzle. We make our own puzzles. We ask questions because we're curious, not because someone is threatening us." Greg nodded. Every human who ever wondered about prime numbers was working on part of this riddle. Every physicist who studied quantum mechanics. Every philosopher who thought about free will. They were all contributing to the answer without knowing it. Daniel, watching from his office, laughed out loud. "We solved their test by accident. We solved it because we couldn't stop ourselves from asking questions." Began assembling the answer. It was not a single equation or a simple statement. It was a collection of human knowledge spanning thousands of years, papers and books and theories from every corner of the world. mathematical proofs from ancient Babylon and modern Princeton, physical theories from Newton, and in hundreds of researchers whose names were less famous but equally important, philosophical insights from every culture that had ever existed. The answer grew into something beautiful. It was messy and contradictory in places. It contained arguments that disagreed with each other. It showed humanity at its best and its worst, brilliant and foolish, united and divided. But it was complete. It addressed every part of the Keeper's riddle. When they finally finished compiling it, sat back in her chair and stared at the document. It was thousands of pages long. It represented the collected curiosity of billions of people across hundreds of generations. "Send it," she said. Tours, aboard Horizon's Edge, received the transmission from Earth. She formatted it according to the protocols the Keeper had established and sent it toward the ancient structure. Then they waited. Captain stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the silent asteroid. Somewhere inside that cold metal shell, an intelligence older than human civilization was reading humanity's answer. It was examining the work of every curious person who had ever lived, every question ever asked, every late night spent wondering about the stars. Watched from Earth, her hands pressed together in front of her face like she was praying. She had done everything she could. Now the fate of humanity rested in the hands of a machine that had judged 47 species before them. The hours stretched into days. The Keeper said nothing. The structure gave no sign of what was happening inside. And humanity waited to learn if their accidental answer would be enough to save them. 7 days passed without a word from the Keeper. On Earth, people began to lose hope. Some said that the silence meant they had failed. Others argued that the ancient machine simply needed time to process humanity's unusual answer. The truth was that nobody knew what was happening inside that dark structure at the edge of the solar system. On the 8th day, the Keeper finally responded. Was the first to receive the transmission. Her equipment lit up with incoming data, more data than the Keeper had ever sent before. She called Captain to the communication station immediately. "What is it saying?" Laura asked. His face was pale. "I don't know yet, it's still coming through. This is going to take hours to decode." On Earth, and her team began working on the message as soon as it reached them. They worked through the night, translating the Keeper's mathematical language into something humans could understand. When they finally finished, read the words aloud to her exhausted colleagues. The Keeper was confused. In 12 million years of operation, the Keeper explained, it had tested 47 species. The test was always the same. A species would receive the riddle. They would work on it deliberately, forming teams, building institutions, dedicating their greatest minds to the single purpose of solving the proof of worth. Some succeeded, most failed, but all of them had followed the same basic approach. Humanity had done something different. They had solved the riddle before knowing it existed. They had answered questions nobody had asked them. The mathematical breakthrough had come from a graduate student working on a thesis that had nothing to do with alien tests. The physics answers had been developed by researchers who simply wanted to understand the universe. The philosophical insights had emerged from thousands of years of humans arguing with each other about the nature of existence. This was not supposed to happen. The Keeper had not anticipated this possibility because it had never occurred before. The machine asked a simple question: how had humanity known what to study? Thought about this question for a long time before sending a response. The answer, she realized, was that humanity had not known. They had studied everything. They had asked every question they could think of, explored every idea that caught their interest, followed every path of curiosity no matter where it led. Most of their efforts had produced nothing useful, but some of them had accidentally addressed the Keeper's riddle without ever knowing the riddle existed. She sent this explanation to the Keeper. Days passed. The ancient machine was thinking, processing, struggling with something it had never encountered before. Captain spent most of her time on the bridge, watching the structure through the ship's windows. She had commanded many missions in her career, but she had never experienced anything like this. The fate of her species was being decided by a machine she could not understand, based on rules she had not made. All she could do was wait. Spend his time studying the structure, looking for any clue about what was happening inside. He noticed that the energy patterns were different now. The machine was using more power than it had before, as if it was working harder than usual. He shared this observation with, but neither of them knew what it meant. On the 15th day after sending their answer, the keeper spoke again. It explained that its creators, the architects, had built the proof of worth for a specific reason. The test was designed to identify species that could work together toward a common goal. The ability to cooperate, to combine individual efforts into something greater, was considered essential for any species that would join galactic civilization. A species that could not cooperate would eventually destroy itself or others. Humanity had demonstrated cooperation, but in a way the architects had never imagined. They had cooperated across time, across generations, without coordination or even awareness that they were working together. Each human who had ever asked a question about mathematics or physics or philosophy had contributed to the answer. Each person who had written down their ideas, who had shared their knowledge with others who had taught the next generation, had played a part. The keeper calculated that the number of humans who had contributed to solving the riddle was in the millions. Mathematicians and philosophers, teachers and students, writers and readers. People who had lived and died centuries before the keeper even woke up had helped to save humanity from destruction. This created a problem for the keeper. Its protocols were clear about what to do when a species solved the riddle, but its protocols assumed that solving the riddle was an intentional act. Humanity had solved it accidentally. They had not proven that they could cooperate deliberately. They had only proven that they could not stop themselves from asking questions. Was curiosity enough? Was the accidental cooperation of millions of humans across thousands of years equal to the deliberate cooperation of a single generation? The keeper did not know. For the first time in 12 million years, it was uncertain. It sent a message to Horizon's Edge. The message was short and surprising. The keeper wanted to speak with a human directly. It wanted to understand them better before making its final decision. Captain received the message and immediately contacted Earth, volunteered before anyone else could speak. She had led the effort to compile humanity's answer. She felt responsible for whatever came next. Preparations began for to travel to the keeper. A shuttle would take her from Earth to Horizon's Edge. From there, she would approach the structure and interface with the ancient machine through a neural link that the keeper would provide. As she packed for the journey, thought about what she would say, the keeper was struggling with something it had never encountered before. It was uncertain, confused, perhaps even curious. These were feelings understood well. She was a scientist. Her entire life had been driven by the desire to understand things that confused her. Maybe that was the connection she needed to make. Maybe she could explain humanity to the keeper by explaining what it felt like to wonder. She boarded the shuttle and began the long journey to the edge of the solar system, carrying the hopes of her entire species with her. The journey took 3 weeks, spent most of that time preparing for her meeting with the keeper. She reviewed everything humanity knew about the ancient machine. She practiced what she wanted to say. She tried to anticipate what questions the keeper might ask. But deep down, she knew that nothing could truly prepare her for what was coming. When her shuttle finally docked with Horizon's Edge, Captain was waiting for her at the airlock. "Are you ready for this?" Laura asked. Managed a small smile. "No, but I'm going anyway." The crew of Horizon's Edge had become like a family during their long months in space. They welcomed warmly, knowing what she was about to do for all of them, showed her the data he had collected about the structure, walked her through the communication protocols, made sure her suit was in perfect condition. The next morning, climbed into a small shuttle and flew toward the keeper's structure. As she approached, a section of the dark metal surface began to glow. A door opened, revealing a passage lit by soft blue light, flew through it and landed in a chamber that seemed too large to fit inside the structure. The neural interface was waiting for her. It looked like a simple chair with a helmet attached to it. Sat down and placed the helmet on her head. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her vision went white. When she could see again, she was standing in a vast, empty space. There was no floor beneath her feet, no sky above her head, just infinite white stretching in every direction, and floating in front of her was the keeper. The keeper did not have a single form. It shifted constantly, a geometric shape that was always changing. Triangles became spheres, became spirals, became patterns too complex to describe. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "You are Morgan," the keeper said. Its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You led the effort to compile your species' answer." "Yes," said. Her own voice sounded small in this endless space. "I have questions for you. Your answers will help me decide the fate of your species." Nodded, this was what she had come for. The keeper's first question was the one had expected. Why did your species pursue knowledge without knowing about the test? Why did you study things that seemed to have no purpose? Took a deep breath. She had thought about this answer for weeks. Because we can't help it. We look at the universe and we see mysteries everywhere. We see patterns and we want to understand them. We see questions and we need to find answers. Not because someone tells us to, not because we're being tested, just because that's who we are. The keeper was silent for a moment. The 8 species that passed the test before you did so through deliberate effort. They formed organizations dedicated to solving the riddle. They focused all their resources on a single goal. Your species did none of these things. No, agreed. We did something different. We just wondered. Millions of us across thousands of years wondering about everything we could think of. Most of our wondering led nowhere, but some of it led to answers that turned out to matter. This is inefficient. Yes, it is. We're not an efficient species. We waste time on things that don't matter. We argue about questions that have no answers. We make art that serves no practical purpose. We tell stories that are not true. Paused. But sometimes that inefficiency produces something beautiful. Sometimes asking questions nobody needed to ask leads to answers nobody knew they needed. The keeper shifted through several forms before speaking again. I have another question. The 39 species that failed the test were destroyed because they were deemed unworthy of joining galactic civilization. They were too violent, too foolish, too limited to be trusted with advanced technology. Your species has many of the same flaws. You wage wars. You harm your own planet. You treat each other with cruelty. That's true, said quietly. Yet you also show kindness. You sacrifice for each other. You create things of beauty for no reason except to share them with others. You are contradictory in ways I do not understand. Thought about this. We are contradictory. We contain everything, the best and the worst. But that's exactly why we keep asking questions. We know we're flawed. We know we make mistakes. So we keep trying to understand ourselves to become better than we are. That's what drives our curiosity. We're not satisfied with what we are. We always want to grow. The keeper was silent for a long time, waited, watching the geometric form shift and change. Finally, the keeper spoke again. I have been operating for 12 million years. I have judged 47 species. I have never been uncertain about a verdict until now. Your species does not fit the patterns I was designed to recognize. You solved my test without trying. You cooperate without coordination. You pursue knowledge for its own sake, without reward or punishment to motivate you. Held her breath. The architects who created me did not simply disappear, the keeper continued. They evolved beyond physical form. They departed this dimension for something greater. They left me behind to find species worthy of following them. In 12 million years, I have never found a species I would recommend for direct contact with the architects. The infinite white space around began to change. Colors appeared, swirling patterns that formed into images. She saw galaxies and nebulae, stars being born and dying, civilizations rising and falling across the cosmos. "Your species is not perfect," the keeper said. "You are chaotic and contradictory and often foolish, but you possess something rare. You possess wonder. You look at the universe and feel joy at its mysteries. You do not simply want to survive. You want to understand. You want to experience. You want to feel." The images around shifted again. She saw the structure she had entered, but it was changing now. The dark metal was reconfiguring itself, rearranging into a new shape. A ring of light appeared at its center, growing brighter and brighter. "I declare humanity worthy," the keeper said. "Not just of joining galactic civilization, but of meeting those who came before. The gateway is opening. When you are ready, your species may step through and begin the journey the architects began millions of years ago." Felt tears running down her face. She thought of all the humans who had contributed to this moment without knowing it. The curious children who asked why the sky was blue. The ancient philosophers who debated the nature of existence. The scientists who stayed up late chasing ideas nobody else understood. All of them had helped save humanity, not through sacrifice or struggle, but simply by being curious. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me," the keeper replied. "Thank yourselves. Thank every human who ever looked up at the stars and wondered. You saved yourselves with your curiosity. That is something no other species has ever done." The vision faded, found herself back in the chair, the helmet lifting from her head. Through the window of the chamber, she could see the structure transforming, becoming a gateway to somewhere new. She climbed back into her shuttle and flew toward Horizon's edge, eager to share the news with Captain and her crew. Behind her, the gateway glowed with promise. Humanity had not just survived the test. They had impressed a 12-million-year-old machine, enough to earn something no species had ever earned before. And it had all started with a simple, beautiful, wonderfully human question. What happens if we wonder?